Greetings and welcome to COPIA. My name is Jacquelyn Buchanan. I'm the Director of Culinary Programs, and this is Nick Landino, our Kitchen Manager in our Culinary Programs kitchen. We'd like to welcome you today to the Meyer Food Forum, which is where we do a lot of our programs and a lot of our instruction classes. And what we're going to teach you how to do today is make focaccia. It's a very simple yeast dough and has many applications, both as a sweet and as a savory. Nick has been making this focaccia for a long time and is a particular expert at it. So he's going to show you how to make it. It's very simple, and as I said, you can vary it a great deal. You can put savory toppings on it and make it almost like a pizza, or you can do wonderful sweet toppings and it can be a dessert. So Nicholas, why don't you show us how you can make focaccia?
Okay. So I'll give you a little history on this. It's very basic ingredients. It's yeast, salt, sugar, flour, olive oil, water, very simple. But it came to us, Jacquelyn and I were working someplace else, and someone stepped in for me one day and did a focaccia bread for the salad bar that we were running. So they just pulled it off the internet, fairly simple recipe. The reason I call it mine is that if you change 3 things about a recipe, you own it. And over time, we've changed a few items in here. Jacquelyn wanted the bread to be a little bit sweeter. So we took the teaspoon or tablespoon of sugar, and it just happened to be one of these containers on the shelf I was working at, and filled that with sugar. So we bumped up the sugar quite a bit. And the salt, I just took it from a teaspoon to a tablespoon just to round it out. And some of the techniques are a little bit different as far as the rising, but I'll show you how we put that together first. 5½ cups of flour. You just put that into a mixing bowl.
And it's interesting, and Nick will tell you why, that we're not... You usually, when you're making a yeast dough, you usually dissolve the yeast in water before you start, and you'll notice that Nick's not doing that. So can you tell us a little bit about that, Nick?
Well, this is why it's all so very simple. So the yeast goes right in here, and what we do is we do a retarded rise. So once we get the dough all mixed, we'll rise it in the refrigerator overnight. It'll come up in about an hour to its first rise in the refrigerator, and at that point, you just take the corners of the dough and tuck it in. I'll demo that for you later. And tuck it in and flip it so you've got that nice ball on top, and let that rise overnight. The next day you take it out and let it rise the rest of the way at room temperature and go onto a tray with that and bake it. But I'll show you that later on.
And is there a reason for that retarded rise, Nick?
What it does is it makes the flour more digestible. It makes it easier on your stomach, a little bit more digestible. That's something I picked up from working with Tony Gemignani. He's the one who actually told me about that. We just did it as a retarded rise because it's just what worked for us timing-wise to get it in the refrigerator the night before and pull it out that morning.
And for those, I'm sorry, for those of you who don't know, Tony Gemignani is the local chef who has won the Italian pizza toss many years in a row. So, an expert on doughs.
Just by way of dispelling any myths, this is something I learned from Craig Ponsford. A little tip of the hat to the folks who've taught me along the way. We pour the salt right on top of the yeast. It does not damage the yeast. So that's an old wives' tale that it would somehow kill the yeast. Sugar in there, all your dry ingredients.
I'm going to be his reference again and mention that Craig Ponsford is the baker and the owner of Artisan Breads in Sonoma County. And Craig Ponsford was the gentleman who went to France several years ago and won the baguette contest against the French. So Nick's taken some classes from Craig in baking, and he's the one who suggested that the yeast can go right into the, into the flour.
So that's it. I just give it a nice mix with the wire whip just to get it incorporated. This is 2½ cups of cold water, which we'll just pour it right in there. And I mix it with a wooden spoon. No particular reason for the wooden spoon, except I like that nice soft sound against the bowl, not metal against metal. And there's some nice memories of this spoon from my mom. She used to, I'm sure anybody who's got an Italian mother knows that your mom would chase you around with the sauce spoon when you were being bad and smack you with it. So there's a little bit of a culinary
history there
and mom thing going on there. And we mix this, again, this is a Craig Ponsford thing, that you just mix this as a shaggy dough. It's not fully mixed. I mean, there are some dry spots and some clumpy spots, and that's it. Very simple. At that point, it's mixed.
And it does indeed look shaggy, as you can see. You'll see it when it goes on to the pan here, that it's quite shaggy. And you're not kneading this at all.
Not kneading it at all, no. It's very rough, very shaggy.
And does that rise have something to do with the fact that you don't need to knead it?
Well, I do like, Jacquelyn mentioned that you can do your yeast separately in some water. in here you just put a little bit of olive oil in that same pan. Okay, very rustic approach to this bread. In that same bowl, just smear some olive oil around in there. And the dough goes right back in there for its first rise. I'll cover that with plastic and put that in the refrigerator for about an hour. And that'll be the first rise.
So now you've taken the bread out of the refrigerator where it spent the night, right? Overnight?
Yes.
Overnight rise.
Comes up to its first rise, just a few little bubbles you'll see in there.
It's a great aroma you can smell.
And it's a very soft
smell.
dough, as you can see. And this is just olive oil. We use Buchanan olive oil. I like it's a nice, mellow, soft taste. And I put a little bit of that on the pan. This is the pan we'll be cooking it in. And just smear that around to the edges, a little bit up on the side here.
And truthfully, I saw this the first time and I thought, wow, that's a lot of olive oil. But it really is a lot of the reason why the bread has such great flavor, and it has a wonderful, crispy, crunchy crust. So don't stint on the olive oil. And again, Nick mentioned arbequina, which is actually a Spanish olive oil, originally a Spanish olive that olive oil is made from. But this is a California, this is a domestic arbequina oil. And it does have a wonderful aroma.
And a little bit of whatever you have, cornmeal. I use polenta because I like those big chunks in there, and it gives a nice crispy
crunchy
finish to the bottom, nice crunchy bottom. And at this point, all you need to do is lift this. Again, it's a very soft, loose dough. It's nearly a batter. You can see how soft that is. And just sort of stretch it out into a nice log on there. And little by little, you just sort of lift it and pull it to the edges. With this bread, what you're doing is you're starting with something absolutely dead. Flour, dust, nothing. And you're breathing life back into it with the yeast and so on. So it is a living organism like wine. It's alive, and so you have to let it have its own time to stretch out and fit out into that pan. If it's a little tight when you get out of the refrigerator, let it rest and it'll relax into that pan.
And I can see that it's wanting to pull back on itself a little bit. But if you leave that like that, it will relax. It will
eventually relax into that pan, yes, given its own time. So you have to pay attention to it and keep your eye on it. At this point, I would cover it with plastic. In about another half hour or so, depending on how warm your kitchen space is, you'll start to see some translucent bubbles forming around the outside and possibly down the center. And once that happens, you just drizzle a little olive oil down here, down the center, down the side, back and forth.
Do you poke those bubbles, or do you just leave them?
I do not poke those bubbles, and I do not dimple. A lot of people like to dimple their focaccia bread, just push it in. I just don't, because I just don't. No particular reason for that. And then some kosher salt.
Could you use something else? Could you use sea salt or a flavored salt?
You could use any salt you wanted, yes. This is just a basic recipe. The nice thing about this recipe is that there's lots of variations you can do by changing the salts, by putting some spices on there, by mixing some fresh herbs into the dough, rosemary or thyme, whatever you like.
So now this needs to relax a little bit into the pan, and how long will that rise take, Nick?
It'll take about a half an hour, depending on how warm your space is, your kitchen space, how warm or how cold it is.
Yeah.
So after it rises, we pop it into the oven at 400 degrees. And that bakes for about 20 minutes, but at 10 minutes in, you're going to have to go in there and rotate it around. One of the mistakes a lot of people make with oven cooking is put it in and forget about it. You really can't, especially like I say, this bread is a living thing. It's behaving a certain way in the oven, so you really want to take a look at it about halfway through the cooking time, 10 minutes in, turn it around, move it around in your oven. In a convection oven, it's going to come up a lot puffier, a lot nicer bread than in a regular oven, and a little bit quicker cooking time, so you need to keep a little bit more of an eye on it.
It stays a little dense, a little tighter, a little more dense in a regular conventional oven,
yes.
A little flatter, but still good, more chewy.
Yes.
So it has its advantages. But I think all of you who have done any baking at all know that there's not an oven on the planet that doesn't have hot spots and that doesn't need to have food rotated in it. So it's right, go in about halfway around and swivel it around. And you'll have a better sense, too, of how it's cooking and how much longer it needs to cook.
So we're going to take our focaccia out of the oven.
Wow. How beautiful is that? How beautiful is that?
And you see it's a little bit darker here, a little bit lighter here. I did rotate it around halfway through the cooking time, and you got this nice dark crust on the bottom.
Perfect, perfect. I hope you'll go home and try this, and I hope you'll come back and take some other classes with us, and we'll give you some more cooking tips here at COPIA.